Life Audio.
Jesus was out teaching all afternoon to the big crowd, and then he says to the disciples, okay, go ahead and feed them because they're hungry. And they're like, what? There's no place around here to buy food. What are you thinking? Even if we had money to go buy food and we had someplace to go do it, like, think about it. It's like they're saying to Jesus, do you have any idea how much that would cost? And Jesus, he says, okay, let's get this. And so he just takes what they have to offer and breaks it and blesses it, and a miracle is performed, and he feeds the masses with leftovers. And that's the reality of who Jesus is. He is so much bigger than what we can begin to imagine. And so when he calls us to do a task, like he called the disciples to feed the masses, it's bigger. And to us, it's overwhelming. And to him, it's nothing.
Welcome to the Faith Over Fear podcast, where we discuss powerful truths to quiet anxiety and fear, big and small. We are passionate about helping God's children discover, embrace, and experience His freedom. I would love to connect with you online or to speak at your next event. Visit our show notes to learn how to connect with me. I'm Jennifer Slattery, and as I consider my personal journey with anxiety and fear, while my thoughts and my prayers, they'll initially focus on my circumstances. I find the greatest comfort, however, in learning more about the character, the heart, the power, and the promises of God. In our increasingly chaotic world, I need to know there is an unchanging, all-knowing, profoundly loving God who remains above it all. And that's why I'm so looking forward to today's conversation with author, speaker, and podcast host Grace Fox. Grace, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me again, Jennifer.
Grace and her husband, Gene, aka Sailor Man, they live full-time in a marina near Vancouver, British Columbia, and co-direct International Messengers Canada, a missionary sending agency with staff in 30 countries. She's written 14 books, is a member of the First Five writing team with Proverbs 31 Ministries, and co-hosts the podcast, Your Daily Bible Verse. She loves fulfilling her God-given assignments, but she also finds great joy in snuggling with her grandchildren, rising early to sip coffee and read her Bible, taking long walks while listening to worship music, and sharing home-baked apple pies, oh yum, and cinnamon rolls, oh my goodness, with her neighbors. That sounds lovely. In her new book, Names of God, Living Unafraid, Grace shares honestly about her faith journey from fear to freedom. She gets that the world is an increasingly scary place and the future is uncertain. She understands how one's life can be altered in a heartbeat. Rather than focusing on the what ifs and the negatives that can paralyze us with fear, she shows how the meaning of 7 of God's names help set us free. Each session includes biblical and real-life examples that illustrate the power of God's names, a guided prayer, reflection questions, and video access to more author insights. Ideal for individual and groups, this heartfelt devotional study will draw you closer to God and bolster your courage to live unafraid. Grace, I really love the wisdom and the insight that you included in your latest release, and I love your emphasis on God's unchanging character. You say that writing this book, Writing Living Unafraid, that grew your faith. How so?
I did a lot of research, and then I realized how, head knowledge isn't enough. You got to take that head knowledge and get it down into the heart. And it has to apply in order to have life transformation. And as I was doing research into the technical parts of the Hebrew names of God and where they showed up in scripture and what they mean and all the rest of that, I began to realize, whoa, I have already experienced God by that name. As I started thinking about situations in my past, I realized I have experienced God by the name Yahweh Roi, or the name Yahweh Yireh. And it was such an encouragement to me to know God had been there all the time. It wasn't just this brand new bunch of knowledge I was gleaning. It's stuff I'd already experienced without even knowing that name was connected to that experience.
I love how he does that, how he just gives us reminders of his faithfulness. You start your book, actually, the devotional, with the Hebrew name for God, Yahweh. And you mentioned that it appears more than 6,000 times in the Old Testament. What is God trying to tell us through that name, Yahweh, which he self-identified, correct?
He did at the burning bush. That's how he introduced himself to Moses. And he said, "This is the name by which I want to be known from generation to generation." And it's also the beginning of the compound names of God that the book includes as well. They start with Yahweh and then they have a second part. So this name is really important and foundational to understanding the character of God. What it tells us is that he is the creator of the universe. He is the one who created life. He sustains it, he owns it, and yet he wants relationship with his creation. And so it also tells us that he is self-sufficient because he is the creator. He doesn't depend on anything. So for ourselves, if we all of a sudden don't have water to drink, we're in big trouble. If we don't have air to breathe, we're gone. But God doesn't depend on any of those things because he's the source of those things. And so we go to him for those things that we need. His existence doesn't depend on it. He's also self-existent. No one created him. He always has been. He always has been because of who he is. And he's not who he is because experiences in his past made him this way. It's not, he just is who he is because he is God. So different from us as human beings. And so when we begin to understand those things about him, how do we not bow in worship to him? How do we not say, he's bigger than I am? He's bigger than I am. So if I think I can live life without him, I've got another thought coming. I don't exist without him. I can learn to trust him because of who he is.
I love that. In your discussion of Yahweh, regarding Moses, the Hebrew who God called to liberate his people from 400 years of slavery and oppression in Egypt, you talk about God's promise to Moses of his presence to guide, to provide, and to protect him. And you wrote, I'm going to quote, "From Moses' perspective, however, the promise offered little consolation because he'd never experienced God up close and personal. His understanding of God was limited to Elohim, the all-powerful genius creator whom Moses may have thought remained distant from his creation," end quote. So in your experience, can our fears potentially indicate where maybe we don't know God as well as we could?
Absolutely. I have a friend who once upon a time said to me this was great, a piece of wisdom that I've never forgotten. And she said, when fearful thoughts come to my mind, I have to stop and ask myself, what aspect of God's character am I not trusting? And I just love that. So, yeah, like we can stop and look at those things that we're afraid of and analyze them under that light and say, am I not trusting God's ability to provide? Am I not trusting the fact that he's my shepherd and he promises to guide me? What is it that I'm scared about? And what aspect of God's character can speak to that?
I love that. Another quote that I liked, which was in that same section, speaking of Moses, you said, "Wrong thinking resulted in fear, and fear led to disobedience." And I have to say, Grace, I think that is one of the reasons, a big reason your book can lead to such freedom, because you're bringing truth that will help us, I think, lets us know, okay, if this is God's character and I'm not thinking that way, then I need to correct my thinking in this particular area.
Jennifer, years ago, I had the opportunity to be in J.I. Packer's home, to be in his living room. And what an amazing experience that was. But I think it was J.I. Packer who said at one point something like that the most important thing about us would be our thoughts of who God is. Because if we think that God is out to get us, we're going to be afraid of him. We're not going to have the healthy fear or that reverential awe of him that is the fear of the Lord. But we're going to be scared of him. We're going to be ducking from him. We're going to be kind of, cowering in his presence. We're not going to have that freedom to come to him as a friend or to run to his arms as a father waiting to welcome us home when we've done wrong. We're going to expect him to come after us and to really be harsh with us, perhaps. But we really do need to align our minds with the truth of who he is so that we can begin to live from that truth. It will change our lives.
Amen. Well, speaking again of Moses, you write that fear is natural when God gives us an assignment. And Moses was certainly given a really an overwhelming assignment. But why do you think fear can paralyze us?
Oh, when God gives us an assignment, it's Henry Blackaby who said something like, when God gives us an assignment, it will always be bigger than us. And how we respond reveals what we believe to be true about him. And the fact is, he will give us those assignments that are bigger because it's going to call us to trust him more. And if we could do it in our own human strength, well, we don't need him then. So he doesn't want us to live that way, right? He wants us to live dependent on him and coming to him constantly because he wants that relationship with us. And so the fears that we experience when God gives us that big assignment would be the fear of inadequacy, just like Moses. Moses was scared. It's that fear of failure, the fear of being exposed maybe as somebody who really doesn't have it all together. And if we're exposed for that, then what are people going to think of us? And it just goes on and on in our head, right? It just gets like a snowball that rolls down the mountaintop and picks up more snow as it goes. And so when we have that one little thought, I can't do that, it just compounds. It gets bigger and bigger. And frankly, I struggled with that fear even as I wrote that book. And I'm struggling with that fear as I write the sequel to it. Like, this is bigger than me, God. And I've had to catch myself and say, stop that. It's not a matter of thinking, I can't do this. It's a matter of saying, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. And because you've called me to it, you will see me through it and you will equip me to do whatever you've called me to do. That's the truth by which we have to learn to live.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the phrase imposter syndrome and how it's pretty, I think it's pretty common. But I was thinking about when you talked about how when God gives us an assignment, it's bigger than us. I was thinking about the gospel opportunity in that, right? Like when we step into that, instead of being like insecure about it, thinking, wow, what is this revealing about the power, the heart, the character of God by me stepping into an area that maybe I am obviously, from my perspective, not a fit or ill-equipped for.
Oh, I think even the disciples struggled with that. I think of the one story in the New Testament where Jesus was out teaching all afternoon to the big crowd, and then he says to the disciples, "Okay, go ahead and feed them because they're hungry." And they're like, "What? There's no place around here to buy food. What are you thinking? We even if we had money to go buy food and we had some place to go do it, like think about it." It's like they're saying to Jesus, "Do you have any idea how much that would cost?" And and Jesus, he says, okay, let's get this. And so he just takes what they have to offer and breaks it and blesses it, and a miracle is performed, and he feeds the masses with leftovers. And I think that's the reality of who Jesus is. He is so much bigger than what we could begin to imagine. And so when he calls us to do a task, like he called the disciples to feed the masses, it's bigger. And to us, it's overwhelming. And to him, it's nothing. But we have to partner with him in doing it. He doesn't expect us to figure it out on our own and to produce that on our own. But I think he delights to show us what he can do when we partner with him doing something that seems impossible.
That I was thinking about what you said about him being the sustainer and provider and seeing that through Jesus feeding the masses. That's a really cool connection there. When I read through the Psalms, I love how David, he always would use, not always, but often he'll use different names for God in his prayers. And that really struck me. And how has for you, do you ever do that? Do you ever use different names for God in your prayers? And how has that maybe deepened your prayer life?
Oh, I use it all the time, Jennifer, now that I understand it more. The Lord is my shepherd, for instance. The Lord is my shepherd. How that has changed my prayer life. I think every single word has meaning. And so if we stop and take it apart and look at those words, it can change our prayer life. So say we're worried about something, we're worried about an assignment he's called us to, or dealing with a situation where a loved one is critically ill or just received a bad diagnosis, whatever. We can go to that and say, you are my shepherd. What does that mean? The There is only one. Lord, capitals, all caps, is Yahweh. So the Yahweh we just talked about, the one who is self-sufficient, self-existent, the one who is the creator, almighty God, who wants relationship with us, he is the Lord, and he is the one who is our shepherd. And that can take away a whole lot of stress and worry when we realize who our shepherd is. But that little word is, Jennifer, that one can be so easily overlooked, but it's present tense. It's not that the Lord was our shepherd, but he's moved on, or he's bygone now. He's old hat. It's not. It's not that he will be our shepherd when we're good enough for it, or when he has time for us, but he is our shepherd right now, this very moment, whatever our need is, he is. And then the Lord is my shepherd. My indicates relationship. So David also talked about God as a rock and as a fortress and these types of things. And those are truth and those are good. But they're not a person. And in this case, he's saying shepherd, which is a person. My shepherd indicates relationship. You can't have a relationship with a rock, if we want to think about it like that. But you have a relationship with a person who is alive and real and vibrant and interacting with you, and you can engage with this person. And so when I think the Lord is my shepherd and integrate that into my prayer life, it just brings it alive. Who am I talking to?
Yeah, so it's almost like you're preaching to yourself as you pray, which I think is really awesome. I know from past conversations you grew up in a legalistic, like a rule following environment, correct?
Correct.
That's pretty when you're forming your ideas, your foundational ideas about who God is and how you relate to him. How did that impact the way you saw God, the way you related to him?
Yeah. I think I grew up with a hard time understanding God's mercy and his compassion and his willingness to forgive. And you know what scripture talks about him just taking our sins and casting them away, like in the farthest sea. And then I've always heard, he posts a sign there that says no fishing. So I didn't grow up with that kind of mentality. I grew up with more shame based. If you don't measure up, if you mess up, you better not let other people know what you've done, because what will they think of you? And so I transmuted that too to my relationship with God too, as, oh, I really messed up there. I better hide from him, because what's he going to think of me? Is he going to love me anymore? Is he going to want to accept me? And so it took me a long time to move beyond that misinformed understanding of who God is, and to recognize that this God who says he loves me, wow, really studying into, say, a New Testament parable like the story of the prodigal son, and the father looking for that son and waiting for him to come home and welcoming him with open arms and loving on him, and not even giving the son a chance to finish his sentence of apology when he arrives. This is the God who cares for us, not a God who says shame on you and wags his finger at us and says, okay, you need to go stand in the corner with your face there until I say I'm ready to deal with you again. That's not how he is.
Do old roots ever try to resurface regarding that legalistic perspective?
I think they do have that tendency to resurface, but not so much anymore. I think just being able to write my stories and be vulnerable like that helps me even recognize that it's okay to say I'm not perfect. It's okay to say I've messed up, because you know what? I have a God who says, I know you've messed up. That's why I sent Jesus, because in Jesus, everything's going to be okay. When you place your faith in Jesus, I cover you with that robe of righteousness. You don't have to keep trying to measure up to my holy standard of righteousness, because grace, forget it. It's never going to happen. You can't do it. And so coming to that place of acknowledging that has brought a lot of healing to my heart over that.
For those who struggle with that, would you recommend maybe journaling, or what would be some steps besides reading? I mean, obviously your book would be really helpful, but I was struck by you actually putting pen to paper and engaging, I'm assuming engaging with God as you wrote, do you think that can be maybe transferred to somebody's journal life?
I think journaling is very helpful because sometimes just putting it down on paper can help get it out of our head, and then we can read it in our own handwriting and say, this is how I'm feeling. This is really how I'm feeling. And nobody's going to judge you as you write in your own journal. You can write whatever you want in there and pour out your heart to God as you do it. That can be very healing. Also, I think if you have a very close godly friend that you can go to and say, you know what? I just need to talk to somebody about stuff that's happened in my past, because I think there's a whole lot of shame in something that's either happened to us or that we've done in the past. And the enemy's strategy is going to be, you don't want to tell anybody because what will they think of you? And so you just better keep it to yourself. Because if he can make us think that and keep us isolated, with that part of our heart isolated, he wins. We just keep going over and over and over the same wrong track in our head, in our thinking about God's acceptance of us. And so if we can say to the enemy, I'm not going to listen to that voice anymore. I just need to go and talk to somebody, whether it be a professional counselor, whether it be a good, trusted friend, a mature person in the faith, and to be able to say, can I share this with you? And find encouragement in that, because that mature godly friend is not going to say shame on you. That person is going to say, thank you for sharing your heart with me. I feel privileged that you feel like I'm a trusted person, that you can bring that to me. And then that person, I guarantee, is going to say, can I pray for you with that? And how can I walk alongside with you as you go through healing in this?
Yeah. Well, and speaking about healing, you share in the book your own journey, how you struggled with guilt and shame, and you shared a vulnerable story, vulnerable part of your story. I would love if you are comfortable to talk about how God particularly helped you heal from abuse you suffered as a child.
Yeah, there was a time where it was a sexual abuse situation where a neighbor boy, he was the perpetrator. I don't need to go into details on that, but here I am decades later and I still remember the details, but they don't hurt me anymore. I don't have to be ashamed of that, but it took me years to be able to come forward with that. And even putting it in print in the book was a part of my healing, really. Never told my parents. They both died without ever knowing what this neighbor boy had done to me. And yet being able to finally express that was a part of laying my heart on the highway, basically. And the enemies there in my head saying, what are people going to think of you if they know that you were abused by this boy as a child? What are they going to think of you? And I was like saying, you know what, that happened to me back then, but that doesn't make me who I am today. What happened to me when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, that can't hurt me today. I'm not going to let it hurt me today. And it doesn't identify who I am. I am a daughter of the King, and he holds me in his arms, and I'm precious to him. That's who I am. That's my identity today. And again, it's like the enemy will get that. He'll put that voice in our head. And if we listen to it long enough, we're going to start believing it. But we have to align our minds with the truth. Who are we in Christ? And when we begin listening more to that voice and that truth than the voice of the enemy, that's when healing can begin. And it's when we voice it. I remember I interviewed Francine Rivers many,
Wow.
many years ago for an interview. And she talked about having had an abortion when she was in university, but how it took her decades to be able to talk about it. And in that interview, she said something that I've never forgotten either. And it was until we are willing to be honest about what happened to us or what we've done, we will never experience healing. Healing begins when we're honest about that. And I found that to be true.
Yeah, as hard as it is, yeah, I hear bringing it into the light. Speaking of, we've been talking about God as shepherd, and even shepherding I think, our most wounded places, right? In our terms, we don't often think about what shepherds do. And I don't even think like modern day in the Western context, shepherds are anything like what David had in mind when he wrote Psalm 23, which I assume is a big part of what you're talking about. So when God calls himself shepherd, what traits in particular is he emphasizing?
Well, there would be the one of providing for us, that's for sure, but guiding us as well. There's so many scriptures in the Psalms that just are like a hand in a glove with this principle of the shepherd guiding us, because he says he will guide us along the best pathway for our lives. And if we want to know where to go, like ask him, and we will hear a voice behind us saying, "This is the path, walk ye in it when you turn to the left or to the right." So many scriptures of his guidance. But there's another one that I just love, and it is this concept of a shepherd knowing when his sheep are restless and what makes them restless. And part of that one might be that there are little bugs. And so, the little bugs can get into their wool, and they can begin to irritate them, or they can get into their ears, or little flies can start buzzing around their eyes, and that causes them not to be able to lie down and rest. And so the shepherd will see that, and he'll apply whatever salve, whatever medicine needs to be applied, so that the bugs will die or leave or whatever, so that the sheep can lie down and rest. And in our lives, what are those irritants? Those things that bug us, right? So there are irritants, and the Lord knows what those things are. And if we say, "Help me, there's no rest for my soul in this," he will be eager to come in and to point out those areas that we might be responsible for, or things that we just need to put up a bit of a boundary, because we're letting things in that are irritating to us, and we might not even recognize that. But he'll show us, and he will teach us and do whatever's needed so that we can be free from those things that bug us. There's so many ways that he comes in as the shepherd to care for us, and it's just amazing. I go back to the verse in Isaiah that says he holds us close to his heart, and I just think there's no safer place than for the little lamb to be wrapped in the shepherd's arm, because there is the predator is not going to want to come near. The presence of the shepherd brings calm to the sheep, and that predator is going to take off when he knows that the shepherd is there to protect his little lamb. And when I'm feeling afraid, I just get that mental picture of the shepherd, Jesus, wrapping me in his arms and holding me close to his heart. And I think there's no safer place to be. An enemy, you may as well take a hike, because you're not coming close when the shepherd's got me in his arms.
Yeah, I love that verse in Isaiah too. And I'm thinking about when thinking about what you talk about shame, Isaiah was speaking to ancient Israel when they were doing a lot of really shameful things. And yet here he says, I hold you close to my heart. I think that's really, really beautiful. I would like to end our talk, Grace, on one of my favorite names for God. And I think it might be one of your favorites too. I'm not sure. But the God of hosts, or the Lord of heaven's armies. And I'm particularly why I think that is such a powerful name nowadays. I know everybody, at least so I'm in the United States, and everybody is nervous about some big things going on with our country. And what does the God as the Lord of heaven's armies, what does that emphasize, and how can that provide comfort in our uncertain times?
Yeah, that name, Yahweh Sabaoth. I always thinking, oh, help me pronounce that correctly. But the Lord of hosts, the Lord of heaven's armies, that's what that name means. And it is the name that David used when he ran towards Goliath. And so we might look at the political situation or whatever, the future is so uncertain. That can look like a giant to us, right? And the giant walked towards the whole army of Israel before David showed up on the scene in that particular Bible story. And he would strut his stuff, and I just envision him going, oh, as he walked towards them. He did it twice a day for 40 days, and the whole army turned around and ran. So then the kid, David, little teenage shepherd boy, shows up on the scene, and he goes, hey, what's going on? And they explain how this Goliath is doing this, and they're all terrified, but he goes, well, what's the big deal? Because he's defying the army of the living God. So what's going on here? Anyway, so when he says he's going to fight Goliath, he goes towards him. He doesn't run from him, but he says, You come to me with all of your armor and your shield and your javelin and all the rest of that, but I come to you in the name of the living God. And that was the name that David was referring to. And I just am amazed how this kid can run, not wearing any armor. He's got his little sling with his 5 stones, and he runs toward the giant and takes aim in the strength of this God who he had come to know intimately when he was out there in the field tending the sheep. So the giant that we're facing, it looks like, oh, we just want to turn around and run. But we have to remember that God is still on the throne. And nothing is going to thwart his purposes. Absolutely nothing. He might be calling his people to revival through everything that's going on. I suspect that's going to play a role in this. As the future is very uncertain, it's like time to get on our knees and cry out to him in faith, believing that he is going to accomplish his purposes. Nothing can stop him because of who he is.
I love that. Thinking back to that first quote, or maybe the second quote I read from your book about false thinking and how the power that comes from true thinking, and your book with just reading it day by day, reading God's character, what a powerful way that for people to shift their thinking to really anchor it in God's character. And so I wanted to say this again, Names of God, Living Unafraid. And I'm going to read from the back cover. Our world is a scary place. Focusing on the mess can paralyze us with fear. In Living Unafraid, Grace Fox shows how the meaning of 7 of God's names help us trade fear for faith. And I don't want to butcher them, so I'm going to say the English version of each one. I am who I am. The Lord is our righteousness. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord will provide. The Lord of hosts. The Lord is there. Most High God. And in each session, it includes biblical and real life examples that illustrate the power of God's names, a guided prayer, reflection questions. I love some of the questions actually that you provide, just really help us to analyze where we're deceived. But so reflection questions and video access to more author insights. Ideal for individuals and groups, this heartfelt devotional study will draw you closer to God and bolster your courage to live unafraid. It is a beautiful, powerful book. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
Well, thank you for listening. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. Then you won't miss a single episode. Share it with your friends. And until next time, may you live as one who truly has been set free.